Darkness, silence. A single monitor flickered to life, bathing the room in an eerie blue glow. On the screen, a message pulsed ominously, "Play me." A chill ran down John's spine. He shouldn't have downloaded the game. Everyone said it was cursed. His finger hovered over the keyboard, a battleground of curiosity and fear. With a deep breath, John pressed enter. The room around him dissolved into a swirling vortex of colors. Nausea gripped him as he was pulled into the digital abyss. When the world solidified, he found himself in a decaying town square. Fog rolled down deserted streets, whispering secrets on the wind. The air was thick with the stench of decay and something else, something distinctly unnatural. John was no longer sitting at his computer, he was in the game. Panic clawed at John's throat. The digital world around him seemed to close in, pixel by pixel, as if the very code of the game was conspiring against him. His breaths came in short, ragged gasps, each one a struggle against the rising tide of fear. He tried to log out, his fingers flying over the keys in a desperate attempt to escape. The screen remained unresponsive, mocking his efforts with its frozen display. But the game wouldn't respond. He was trapped. The realization hit him like a punch to the gut, leaving him reeling in a sea of dread. A blood-curdling scream pierced the silence, shattering the fragile illusion of safety he had clung to. It was a sound that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere, reverberating through the digital landscape, sending a jolt of pure terror through his veins. He wasn't alone. The scream was a stark reminder that this world, though virtual, was filled with very real dangers. He spun around, searching for the source of the sound, his eyes darting from shadow to shadow. Every flicker of movement seemed to hide a new threat, every dark corner a potential ambush, but found only shadows dancing in the flickering light of a nearby lamppost. The light cast long, eerie shapes that seemed to twist and writhe, playing tricks on his mind. He had to find a way out. The thought was a lifeline, a single thread of hope in the overwhelming darkness. He couldn't let the fear paralyze him. He had to find other players. Maybe they could help him, or at the very least provide some semblance of companionship in this nightmare. John started to run, his heart pounding against his ribs like a drumbeat of fear. Each step was a battle against the rising panic, each breath a struggle to maintain control. Each step he took deeper into the game world seemed to pull him further from reality. The lines between the virtual and the real blurred, leaving him disoriented and afraid. The town was a macabre parody of life, its streets lined with decaying buildings and empty windows that seemed to watch his every move, filled with grotesque creatures that lurked in the shadows. Their forms were twisted and unnatural, as if they had been pulled from the darkest corners of his nightmares. Their eyes glowed with an infernal light, a sickly, unnatural hue that sent shivers down his spine. They were the eyes of predators, watching, waiting, their moans echoing through the deserted streets. The sound was a haunting symphony of despair, a reminder that in this world of pixels and fear, escape was not guaranteed. But amidst the terror, a glimmer of hope remained. John knew he had to keep moving, to keep fighting. The game might have trapped him, but he wasn't ready to give up just yet. With renewed determination, he pressed on, each step a defiance against the fear that sought to consume him. He would find a way out, no matter what it took. Days blurred into nights. John scavenged for food, water, and a way out, his hope dwindling with each passing hour. He encountered other players, their faces etched with the same fear that gnawed at him. They were prisoners, trapped in a digital nightmare. They banded together, finding strength in numbers against the creatures that haunted the town. There was safety in their shared predicament, a flicker of warmth in their shared fear. One woman, Sarah, became his rock. Her bravery in the face of the game's horrors was inspiring. They shared stories, fears, and dreams of escaping the game's clutches and returning to the real world. For a while, amidst the horror, John felt a glimmer of hope. He clung to it, to Sarah, as if they were lifelines in a sea of despair. They discovered a hidden message, a riddle scrawled on a wall in what seemed like blood. The heart of fear holds the key. It was a clue, a way out. Their hope, so recently rekindled, burned brighter. They had a purpose, a shared goal that transcended the horror that surrounded them. But the game had other plans. A monstrous entity, a creature of pure darkness, descended upon them. It picked them off one by one, toying with them, relishing their terror. John watched in horror as his new companions, his friends, were slaughtered before his eyes. His screams were swallowed by the oppressive atmosphere of the game. He was alone, completely and utterly alone. Section 5. A Glimmer of Hope. John fled, the entity's raspy laughter echoing behind him. The forest seemed to close in around him, branches clawing at his clothes and face as he ran. His breath came in ragged gasps, each step feeling heavier than the last. The darkness was almost suffocating, but he couldn't stop. He wouldn't stop. The sinister shadow was relentless, its presence a constant reminder of the danger he was in. He stumbled upon an ancient, dilapidated cathedral, its Gothic spires clawing at the sky. The building seemed to loom over him, a dark sentinel in the night. The air around it was thick with an eerie silence, broken only by the distant howls of the wind. It was a place that seemed forgotten by time, yet it held a strange allure, a promise of sanctuary amidst the chaos. He pushed the heavy oak doors open and stepped inside. The doors creaked loudly, the sound echoing through the vast emptiness. As he entered, the temperature dropped noticeably, sending a shiver down his spine. The air inside was stale, filled with the scent of old wood and decay, but it was a refuge, a temporary escape from the terror that pursued him. The interior was a cavernous space, dimly lit by shafts of moonlight filtering through stained glass windows. The light cast eerie patterns on the stone floor, creating a mosaic of colors that seemed almost otherworldly. Shadows danced in the corners, giving the impression of unseen watchers. The silence was profound, broken only by the distant sound of dripping water. And in the center of the cathedral, chained to an altar, was Sarah. Her figure was a stark contrast to the grandeur of the surroundings, a tragic centerpiece in a place of worship. The chains that bound her glinted in the moonlight, a cruel reminder of her captivity. Her clothes were torn and her skin was pale, almost ghostly in the dim light. She was alive, but barely. Her breaths were shallow, each one a struggle. Her body bore the marks of her ordeal, bruises and cuts that told a story of pain and suffering. Yet, despite her weakened state, there was a spark of life in her, a glimmer of hope that refused to be extinguished. Her eyes fluttered open, meeting his with a mixture of relief and terror. They were eyes that had seen too much, endured too much. But in that moment they also held a plea, a silent cry for help. John felt a surge of determination. He couldn't let her down. He wouldn't. "John," she whispered, her voice hoarse. It was a sound that broke his heart, filled with pain and desperation. She struggled to speak, each word a monumental effort. But there was urgency in her tone, a need to convey something important. "You have to finish it." Her words hung in the air, heavy with meaning. John knew what she meant. The task that lay ahead was daunting, but it was the only way to end the nightmare. He had to find the strength within himself to see it through. You have to destroy the heart, the source of the entity's power. It was a dark, twisted object, pulsating with malevolent energy. Destroying it was the key to freeing Sarah and ending the terror that had plagued them. He rushed to her side, his heart aching at her battered state. He gently took her hand, feeling the coldness of her skin. Tears welled up in his eyes, but he blinked them away. There was no time for sorrow. He had to act. He swore he would save her. He had to. The promise was not just to her, but to himself. It was a vow that gave him strength, a purpose that fueled his resolve. He would not let the darkness win. She was the only reason he was still clinging to sanity. In a world that had gone mad, she was his anchor, his reason to fight. And fight he would, with every ounce of strength he had left. The battle was far from over, but with Sarah by his side, he felt a glimmer of hope. Section 6. The Price of Freedom. "The heart," she croaked, pointing to a hidden chamber behind the altar. "It's the only way." John knew what he had to do. He kissed Sarah's forehead, a promise sealed with a tear, and descended into the darkness. The air grew colder, heavy with malevolence. The stench of decay intensified, making him gag. He pressed on, driven by a desperate hope and a love that had blossomed in the face of hell itself. He found it, pulsating in the darkness like a monstrous heart. It was the source of the game's evil, the source of their suffering. He raised his weapon, a sword he'd scavenged from a fallen comrade, and struck. Section 7, Betrayal and Sacrifice. The game world shattered around him. The once vibrant and immersive digital landscape was now a chaotic mess of broken pixels and glitching textures. It was as if the very fabric of the virtual reality he had known was tearing apart, leaving nothing but a void of confusion and despair. He was back in his room, the familiar glow of his monitor washing over him. The transition from the chaotic game world to the quiet, dimly lit room was jarring. The hum of his computer was the only sound, a stark contrast to the cacophony of the collapsing digital realm. He had escaped, he had survived. The relief washed over him like a wave, momentarily soothing the tension that had gripped his body. He took a deep breath, trying to steady his racing heart. The nightmare was over, or so he thought, but his victory felt hollow. He had left Sarah behind. The realization hit him like a punch to the gut. The joy of survival was overshadowed by the guilt of his actions. He had made it out, but at what cost? The image of Sarah, trapped and alone, haunted him. His blood ran cold. He had misunderstood the riddle. The cryptic clues that had guided him through the game now seemed like cruel jokes. He replayed the moments in his mind, trying to find where he had gone wrong. The answer was both simple and devastating. The heart of fear wasn't an object, it was a sacrifice. The game had demanded a price, and he had unwittingly paid it with Sarah's life. The heart-shaped object he had been searching for was a metaphor, a twisted representation of the ultimate cost of his escape. He had to leave someone behind to escape. The realization was a bitter pill to swallow. The game had been designed to test his resolve, to see how far he was willing to go to save himself. And in the end, he had failed the test, choosing his own survival over Sarah's. He lunged for the keyboard, desperate to re-enter the game, to go back for her. His fingers flew over the keys, trying to find a way back into the digital world. He couldn't leave her behind. Not like this. There had to be a way to save her, to undo his mistake, but the game was gone. The screen remained blank, unresponsive to his frantic commands. The interface that had once been his gateway to the virtual world was now an empty void, mocking his desperation. Deleted. A message flashed on the screen, cold and final. "Thank you for playing." The words were a cruel reminder that his journey was over and there was no going back. The game had taken everything from him, and now it was gone, leaving him with nothing but regret. Sarah's face, filled with fear and betrayal, was seared into his mind. He could still see her eyes, wide with terror, as she realized what he had done. The memory was a knife in his heart, twisting with every beat. It was the last thing he saw before the world dissolved. The image of Sarah, fading into darkness, was burned into his memory. It was a haunting reminder of his failure, a ghost that would follow him for the rest of his life. He had condemned her to a fate worse than death. The weight of his actions pressed down on him, suffocating him with guilt. He had survived, but at a terrible cost. And now, he had to live with the knowledge that he had sacrificed someone he cared about for his own freedom. Section 8. Alone in the darkness. John was alone. The real world seemed cold, alien. The guilt was a crushing weight, a constant reminder of his failure. He tried to forget, to bury himself in work, in distractions, but Sarah's face haunted his every waking moment. The game was gone, but the nightmare lived on, feeding on his guilt and despair. He saw her face everywhere, in the faces of strangers, in his dreams, in the flickering shadows of his apartment. He was a prisoner of his own making, trapped in a prison of guilt and sorrow far more terrifying than any digital hellscape. He was left with nothing but the chilling echo of her final words, "You promised." Section 9. A haunting memory. Years passed, but the memory of that night, of Sarah, of his betrayal, remained. It became a part of him, a shadow that followed him wherever he went. The guilt was a constant companion, a reminder of the price of his freedom. He would never forget the horror of the game, the friends he had lost, and the woman he had condemned to an eternity of digital darkness. The game was a chilling reminder that sometimes the most terrifying monsters are not the ones we create, but the ones we become.